Well, we welcome all of you, friends. We've gathered on this summer evening to worship God, to know and grow in our knowledge of God's ways, to share in our Caring Institute family. And this includes our community that's online right now, and our worldwide community that will be joining us on YouTube. We welcome especially tonight Tisha Smith, her first time in the Institute. She's a Friends Church leader in Jamaica. Welcome, Tisha. So may we give thanks to God for one another and for Brockie, who has come to serve us again tonight. Eternal God of all nations, we thank you for one another in this Institute family, for every person you bring into our lives to teach us. We thank you particularly for Brockie Follette, who has come to teach us today. We ask that your Holy Spirit will be her guide as she teaches, and will be our guide as we listen. We'll be faithful to use all that we gain in our class to serve you better. May Jesus Christ be praised in every way. I'm muting. I'm in the process of muting mics here. Brockie Follette has taught us well in the past two sessions. She's given us many suggestions for ministering to youth and families. She's prepared to do the same this evening, to go a little bit different direction. We thank Brockie for committing herself to teach us. We're most blessed by her. She received her Master of Arts in Family Ministries at Berkeley College, after which she has now served as chaplain of the college. She continues to serve alongside her husband, Todd, as he gives pastoral leadership to the Haviland Friends Church. She has and continues to teach in the Kaleo Academy. We've had a good theology camp since we were last together. She ministers to people across the U.S. and to young friends and friends missionaries from other parts of the world. She's gifted in helping others discern their calling from God, equipping adult mentors to help others as they help young people discern their calling from God. She works closely with individuals and with families. She and Todd have a lovely family themselves, and 4 beautiful children: Clinton, Craig, Krista, and Katie. And Katie is, how old is Katie? 9. She's 9 years old, and she gets up and reads scripture in worship, and she sings. Her mother will accompany her on the piano, or maybe she'll play the piano. She can do just about anything. But you taught her well. I'm grateful to God for my long-time friendship with Brockie. She grew up the same time our family grew up. I was pastor of the University Friends Church, where her uncle Henry was choir director and soloist. What a marvelous opportunity we have to learn from Brockie, and we're so grateful that you have come. So I will turn this over to you, Brockie, get my papers out of the way and help others get connected.
Hi.
I'll make sure it's still working.
Good evening. It's good to be with you all one last time in this rotation. And I want to tell you that this topic tonight is one that I'm definitely not an expert on. I'm actually in the learning process, and I would say that I'm really on phase 1. But I feel like it's such an important topic to inform the church on. And I do want to let you know that most of this information is something that I learned from Shelley Leininger, which she told me I could give some of her information to you. She was going to be on with us tonight as well, but she had other obligations. And so Gary Wright told me one time, if you find a good sermon and you like the content, just keep preaching it. And if you steal it, just tell who you got it from. And so I want you all to know that a lot of what I'm talking about tonight is really Shelley's research. But it's really been life-changing for me this past year. So I'm a learner along with you, and I just want to have us be informed by something that I think is important to all of us. I want to tell you why this topic is important to me. You may have heard of this called trauma-informed or trauma-aware. A lot of times if you are in the education field, especially at a grade school, junior high, or high school level, this might be a topic that you're already hearing about. But this topic is important to me. Next year, I'll be starting my 4th decade of youth ministry. I figured that out the other day, that I'll really be starting my 40th year. And, or 4th decade, not 40th year. Boy, I was really young when I started. Anyhow, but what I realized is that even though I've been doing youth ministry for this long, I found that the my toolbox that I've kept with me in youth ministry, that some of the tools that I have are no longer working, or they're not working as effectively. It's almost like my hammer has become dull, or my saw isn't quite doing the job that it needs to do. And I think that a lot of my world, when I think about the communities that I've lived in, I think about living in Haviland, living in Riverton, Kansas, living in Grinnell, Iowa, and then now back again in Haviland, that beyond my first 18 years were in a very diverse setting, but my former years after 18 have predominantly been in white middle-class communities. And so a lot of my toolbox has been for a white middle-class child or someone in youth ministry. That's how I've been calibrated. And so what's happened maybe is in the last 3 years, I began to see that I need some new tools, that the resources that I've used, in some ways, I don't want to say they're not working, they're just not working as effectively as I would like to with people that I'm working with. And so really for me, this is a twofold thing, is that there's some young adults, and not just at Barclay, but young adults that I care greatly about. They're in their 30s. I just had begun to notice that they weren't, I guess the phrase that I would use is, it's almost like a failure to launch, that they haven't been able to launch as adults, that they continue to go back to some kind of a dependency, whether it's a drug or alcohol or over-the-counter medicine, or maybe cutting or self-harm. But they're in their 30s and they're really struggling to try to find a way to function in this world. And these are kids that, or these young adults, are people who grew up in a church or else grew up in homes that were faith-filled, and they've just struggled. And so that's why this topic is important to me. I think why this topic needs to be important to the church is that I don't think that we should just leave it up to the schools to be talking about this. I don't think we should just leave it up to the government, or just the government to be talking about this. I believe that the church is one of the best places that we should be talking about this. In fact, I believe that we should be the first responders, that we should be like a medical team that's responding first, or an EMT. I believe that the church has the best hope to offer, that we are a place where Christ intersects and can heal trauma. That's why I think it's important for the churches. And I think that sometimes, too, many of our churches are only calibrated for what we've known from the past, that we haven't sought out different resources, or we haven't begun to ask questions of how to reach people. And maybe that's why they're not even coming to our churches. We're just keep reaching out to the same constituency we've had and not been thinking about the people that maybe come once and don't come back. It might be because our toolbox doesn't have great tools for them. So I want to define for you what trauma aware is. And just by the way, trauma is actually the Greek word for wound. Let me just say that again and put that in context. Thinking about the New Testament, trauma is the Greek word for wound. So the definition of trauma aware, organizations become aware of how prevalent trauma is and have begun to consider that it might impact their clientele and staff. And I would just change in there, clientele and staff, how it might impact their congregation. Processes of trauma aware. Leadership in these organizations understands that knowledge about trauma can enhance the overall experience. Awareness training is made available and organizations explore what next steps need to be taken. In other words, when I'm a leader and I'm beginning to encounter people who are coming in with different kinds of trauma from their life, it helps me to enhance my overall learning experience of taking their life as a whole. And just this last one, trauma-aware indicators. We should know as a church what trauma refers to, and we should also be aware that knowledge about the impact of trauma can change the way we see and interact with others. I like to think about this in some ways like us having the eyes of God. You often have heard this, maybe a story before, where two women run into each other at the grocery store, and one woman says hello to the other, and the other one doesn't hardly say anything, just barely says something. And then the one woman goes home and says to her husband, "Well, Betsy must be mad at me because she didn't say anything to me today at the store." But what the woman doesn't know is that Betsy's had a really bad day. She had a bad day at work because she lost her job. She had a bad day at home because one of her children ran away. And oftentimes, we aren't seeing the real picture of what's going on. We have to have our eyes open in a way that God can open them to help us understand, to see the brokenness in people, to see why they're reacting the way they are. So I've included in this, but we're not going to watch it tonight, just a link. This is a really good short talk about what trauma is. And it's about a 15-minute talk, and so I included the address in this, or you can actually even Google the top part of this. And the name of the person who's giving it, her name is Dr. Burke. She's actually the current Surgeon General of California. And so I'll just tell you a little bit what you're going to see on this video, but I think it's so important to our process here. She talks about how in 1993, the CDC had a report that they let out, and it said that 7 out of 10 deaths were associated with the result of this research. And they said that the people who were the result of this research had 3 times higher heart disease and lung cancer. And what they also found out is that doctors were not trained in knowing how to respond to the people in this research. And what the research was about childhood trauma. And this doctor, as she's talking, she said that most of the time, doctors would just refer people to, if this is a social problem or a mental health problem, so I just need to refer them to someone else. And Dr. Burke, actually, after she did her residency, she really wanted to go someplace where she felt like she could make a difference. So she went to the California Pacific Medical Center in San Francisco. And she went there because it was one of the poorest communities of undeserved people. And it was serving, one hospital was serving 10,000 children. And she said that oftentimes they were doing great things, getting people informed, getting health care better, taking care of immunizations, all those types of things. But she said there was this underlying thing that kept coming back over and over again, and she couldn't just quite get her finger on it. And she said she would often get people to her office, children in her office, that would say they have ADHD or hyperactivity. But she said when I do the testing on it, that's not actually the results that I would get. And so she was becoming frustrated with this. So in her mind, she tells a story about how if I lived in a village and there were people going to a well to get their water, and 99 people came back with diarrhea, I, as a doctor, for that one person, could keep writing over and over prescriptions of saying, there's diarrhea going on here. It must be the same disease that is going on. And so I know how I'm going to take care of it with an antibiotic. But she said, or I can be the doctor that says, I need to go see what's in the well to see what is causing this problem. And so she began this journey to figure out what is going on with all these children. And so that's when she was first introduced. It's called the ACE, which we're going to talk about that more later on. It's the Adverse Childhood Experiences. It's a test that can be given. And that for her is what changed Dr. Burke's trajectory, that she decided she really wanted to look into what was going on. So what exactly is trauma? I'm going to give you some definitions just to help us out here tonight. Trauma is emotional and psychological trauma, which is the result of extraordinarily stressful events. Trauma shatters your sense of security, your competence, your self-efficiency, and or value. One seeks, therefore, to develop behavioral and emotional strategies for survival coping in a world perceived as dangerous or non-supportive. And I think that last one really sticks out to me, that I think when I've been working with some of these young adults, that is often what I hear over and over again, even though I feel like people are trying to move towards them, that often the phrase that they will say is, there's no one supporting me, there's no one who really cares about me. Some more of the definition of trauma. Traumatic experiences often involve a threat to life or safety, but any situation that leaves one feeling overwhelmed, worthless, unwanted, and isolated can be deemed as traumatic. Trauma and abuse can be physical, sexual, verbal, emotional, and psychological in nature, including active maltreatment and passive maltreatment. In other words, neglect, exclusion, or ignoring. It is not the objective facts that determine whether an event is traumatic, but rather one's subjective emotional experience of the event. And I just want to step aside to say that. To you or me, because we have not had that experience maybe, we don't understand sometimes why is this such a big deal, why can't you get over it? Well, we're not the person who's actually had the emotional experience of the trauma. We're not the one who's had the impact of that on our brain, on our heart, on our physical bodies. The more frightened, helpless, powerless, unwanted, etc. you feel, the more likely you are to be traumatized. Trauma is not an event. Trauma is the result of an event or series of events. Events are not traumatic in and of themselves. They become traumatic when they exceed a person's ability to cope. Let me say that again. They become traumatic when they exceed a person's ability to cope. I'll just do another side note here. I was having a conversation with an individual after I had heard this initial colloquium from Shelley Leininger. And as I was talking to this person, because they're someone that I know and I know some of the past of their own life, I think that we were sort of doing that math in our heads about how many different adverse child experiences they had. But yet they're an adult who is incredibly resilient and bounced back incredibly well from those things. But I think it's because when I look at this individual, they had all the right tools to help them cope. Oftentimes, many people who are stuck in trauma don't have very good tools to help them cope. So what does trauma look like? If I were thinking about just trauma, I would say, well, how can I tell if someone is experiencing the effects of trauma? I'll give you an example of someone that I remember not knowing the full story of them. It's an individual that I grew up knowing, and they were a little bit younger than me, and I hadn't seen them for a couple of years. And this was a very pretty young girl with long blonde hair, very trim, exercise, big smile, a lot of fun. And I saw her almost 2 years later, and her whole physical being had changed. Her hair was now jet black. She had probably put on 50 pounds. There was no longer the smile on her face, and she had several tattoos on her. And I didn't know her story until a few years later and began to hear the trauma that she had experienced in her life of abuse and assault and drug use. And then I realized that outside what I was seeing on her was really a part of what was happening inside. And so that was an indicator for me that there was something not quite right there in her life. There's 3 common reactions to trauma. This is often what you'll see. The first one is self-stigmatization. In other words, this might be words that you would hear people say. I'm a terrible person. I'm unlovable. Nobody will ever like or value me. This person may vow to never tell or seek to hide their true self by acting as if everything's okay. They want to be left alone with their own hurt and pain, and there's a lot of negative self-identity. The second reaction often is loss of trust. I can't trust anyone. I must be vigilant in not trusting anyone. Or oftentimes you might see this. You might see them let down their guard and they'll move to you, and you feel like you've moved into that area of confidence with them, but then the next time you see them, they will push you completely out. I must be vigilant in not letting anyone trust me. I must keep my guard up. They withdraw and isolate to hide from others, or they lash out to distance themselves. And their best offense is a good defense, that they live on the defense more than anything. These are just some pictures that I want to share with you. Actually, they're from Shelley, but I think they're helpful for us to see like some common reactions that come out of trauma. So this is what a survivalist, a person who's come out of trauma, is like the self-protective brain. So you can see that this dog is sort of mangy, and it's a dog that's out, it's got some wounds on it, open wounds, and it looks a little, I'm not sure I want to interact with this dog someplace. Or maybe this is another one, a very fearful anxiety. You can see that look in the cat's eyes, ready to pounce. And this is another one, just scared or afraid, that oftentimes the person that's had the trauma will be a person who lives in constant fear. That's how a fear of everything happening, from physical things to emotional things to maybe common, ordinary, everyday things that we take for granted. And another one of these is just a person who might constantly be in attack mode. Maybe you move towards someone in compassion, and then you feel like you get your hand slapped. You feel like you're doing the right thing, but you feel like you can't ever get it right when you move towards them. Or maybe this last one, which is a little harder to notice, is a timid, I don't want to say shy, but just I'm going to totally pull back. I'm distrustful from this position. I'm not going to put myself out there. And a third reaction to trauma is often self-blame or loathing. Words that people might use are, I'm to blame for this, I'm at fault, and I deserve this. They may engage in self-harm behaviors, substance abuse, to blunt emotional pain, or accept abusive treatment from others in future relationships as this is what I deserve. So those are like 3 of the most common reactions to trauma. Then there's trauma and the 3 E's, or let me go back on this, I apologize. I did get that one. There's the 3 E's of trauma. There's the event, there's experience or experiences, and then there's effects. Trauma can occur when an event or series of events or circumstances is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and the experience has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So if I could give you an example of this, because sometimes I think it's just helpful. I think about a young man that I worked with one time. He's now in his 40s. But his traumatic event was that he was abused by a stepfather. And so that was the event that happened to him in his life, but it was happened over a longer period of time. And so he experienced that specific type of abuse over and over again. Well, the lasting adverse effects on his life have been turning to drugs and to alcohol to try to numb that pain. Some of the other effects are not being able to hold a job, not being able to stay married to his spouse, that has completely affected his mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Some of the questions that he asked is, where was God when that was happening in my life? Where were my parents when that was happening in my life? He has a nervous shake that he hasn't ever been able to get rid of. But that is specifically an example of how that played out in his life. Then there's certain types of trauma. I think this is important to note. First, there's acute trauma. This is a single incident, a crime victim, a serious accident, or a natural disaster. Something that is one-time event, but it's very, very harsh and shocking. And then there's a chronic event. It's repeated, a prolonged trauma, such as a domestic violence or abuse or war. That if you are a child of war in another country, that would be something that happened over and over again in your lifetime. It was a part of you. You lived that out chronically. And then the complex type of trauma is more of an interpersonal trauma, varied in multiple traumas and early onset, often by a trusted caregiver. I want you to hear that again, that's when it becomes more complex, is that the people that I thought were there in place to help take care of me were actually the people who actually end up injuring me for whatever reason it was. So I mentioned this earlier, the ACE, you will often hear it called the ACE test, and it's the Adverse Childhood Experiences. That's what it is. So the ACE study was started, just the study itself was started in 1992 by Dr. Vincent Follette, and then there was a medical group called the Kaiser Permanente. And then also Dr. Robert Ando, he was part of the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC. And the definition of an ACE, an adverse childhood experience, is intensive and frequently occurring sources of stress occurring in childhood which result in significant impact on brain development and an ability to regulate behavior and decrease life expectancy by 20 years with no caring adult intervention. That last line is so important. We're going to keep talking about this. This is these young people who are involved in this, it says no caring adult intervention. In other words, they were literally stuck in their situation with no adult there to care for them to help them get out. The first ACE study was actually published in 1998. So you can see that there was 6 years difference. The study started, and in 1998 were the results that were from that. And then what we know from here on out, if you look at the bottom part of this slide, is since the publication of the ACE study in 1998, subsequent studies have demonstrated the broad prevalence of ACEs in the general population and have added to the evidence showing this greater association between ACEs and negative health and behavioral outcomes. So in other words, what we're seeing is maybe when they began to do these tests in 1992 through 98, if you add 20 years on to the people that they were testing and then you come and revisit, you begin to see how the effects on their brain and how their lives are being lived on the rest of their lives. So here's some categories. There's actually 10 ACEs, 10 adverse childhood experiences that are on the test. And this is how they break down, but there's physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Then there's physical and emotional neglect. And then there's household dysfunction. There's mental illness. There might be an incarcerated parent or a relative, a sibling. Maybe this child saw their mother or someone else in their home treated violently. They were a witness to someone in their home having substance abuse. That could either be alcohol, over-the-counter the drugs, or drugs of some kind. And then also divorce. And I would add to that one, that would be included in there. Not so much, I wouldn't call it dysfunction, but if there's a death in the family, that the idea of the word dysfunction there is that it does change the function of your house when someone dies. So this is just so you can see the list. This is the top 10 ACEs here. And so I'll just read through these, but then I want to take a little bit of time for you to see what would be on a test if somebody were taking them. So the 10 ACEs are sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, loss of a parent, which could also include divorce or separation, witnessing family violence, incarceration of a family member, having a mentally ill, depressed, or suicidal family member, or living with a drug addict or alcoholic family member. I just want to give you a couple examples. If there were someone taking this test, this is how the questions would read. So for physical abuse, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? You can either check the box no, or if yes, enter the amount of time, or enter a number 1 there. And then the second question, kind of follow-up question, is how frequent were the incidents and how severe? So that would be just an example. That's under the abuse section here of the categories. And then the next one, this is how it would read for like physical neglect. Did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you? Or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you, or take you to the doctor if you needed it? And then it just says check no, or if yes, enter 1. And then the question again is how frequent or how severe? And so that would be under this neglect section. And the last one, this is loss of a parent. Were your parents ever separated or divorced, or did one or both of your parents die? Check no if that's the answer, or if yes, enter a 1. And then also to add to this question is sort of interesting is how frequent. Like oftentimes you might see a child whose parent remarried several times. And so that becomes a part of their story. I want to take a side note here, and this isn't me trying to be comedic or disrespectful, but oftentimes I find that people think that what they're experiencing is trauma when it's not. Like, for instance, my daughter, I know Dave referenced her, when actually we were at this colloquium, they showed a picture of a family at dinner that all had their phones out. And immediately Katie turned and looked at me. And I thought we'd had a pretty good rule of keeping our phones put away, but that was her way of trying to tell me, you guys can do better. But for her, she might say, well, that's traumatic, that often my parents are on my phone and they're not paying attention to me. And she might have disregarded the fact that we'd just spent, 5 hours of the day with her playing games or going to the pool or doing something fun. And so I have to often say that, not in a funny way, but to say, we really are talking about trauma on a different level here. If you look at this list, these are very severe traumas happening in someone's life. So what happens after a person would take this ACE test is that they would then score. So for instance, just to give you an example, for me, I only have a 1 on this. My score would be 1 because my parents divorced. And so for me, that would be under a loss of a parent. But what often happens, this is an A score. So say that there's somebody who has, they experienced physical abuse in their house as a child, and they also experienced neglect, where they were often locked in a closet or left alone. And then they saw a parent die and had to go live with another member of the family. And then, especially that you will see a lot of times that men in young Black communities will have several of these. And the reality is, the more that you have of these that you score on, the higher that your ACE score is, the more that you are at risk. You're at risk for many things in your life. That's what happens. I find this to be a really interesting piece of research. And I need to find the book on this to reference it. I know Shelley gave it to me in her bibliography. This is a really interesting piece when you're thinking about people that you know who do foster care. And I know that we're seeing a lot more families do foster care, and they're getting children who are pretty young, like in their first year of life, coming to their homes. Just recently, we had some friends who received a baby who was in their first week of life because they were at risk. But it says maltreatment in the first year of life follows, so catch that with me. So say a kid has a good first year of life, or I'm sorry, if they have a bad first year of their life, but then they are put into a foster home for a healthy, safe environment for the next 11 years, actually leads to worse outcomes than a safe and healthy first year followed by 11 years of adversity. So let me make sure you understand that. So maybe I am a child who, my mother was addicted to drugs. And so my mother delivers at the hospital, and I'm actually given to a foster family right there on the first day. And say for that first year of my life, I am given great care, love, all my needs are taken care of, you know, my diapers are changed, I get right food, I'm developing the way that I'm supposed to be developing. But say a year later that my mom becomes clean, and she comes back and wants me back in her life, and so I go with her. So there's that example, but then let's take it as a different example. Let's say that my mom instead is a crack addict, but she keeps me the first year of her life, but then I go and I stay with a foster family for the next 11. I actually have more of a chance of not having played out that severe trauma if I have good treatment than in my first year than if I have good treatment for 11 years. I think that's such an interesting fact to understand. And especially I don't know if any of you are related to this, but I think sometimes people who do foster care or someone who got a child after they were a little older, they don't understand why they're not effective or why they can't cure whatever's going on there. I think it's not because they're doing anything wrong. I think it's because that first year of development is so important in what's happening in the brain that sometimes what we're doing isn't really the issue. We're doing everything to put all the right Band-Aids on, but they haven't been able to get health to the brain development in their life. So the first year of life can either poison or inoculate depending on a child's circumstance. Just something to think about. It's a very interesting statistic. So this is what the human brain on trauma looks like. So you see here, this is a 3-year-old child, and this is what a normal brain looks like. And you can very easily see that a 3-year-old child at extreme neglect, that there is visible change to the brain. I think anybody can see that if you look at it. Also, this is just to help you think about what can several adverse childhood experiences do? What are some of the outcomes if there is not some kind of intersection of help? First of all, there can be disrupted neurodevelopment. that the brain doesn't operate the way originally that God designed it to work. There can be social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. And look at that just real clearly, social, emotional, and cognitive. That's not even talking about the physical. There can be adoption of health risk behaviors, the way that they eat, the way that they take care of themselves, maybe dependent too much upon a substance. There can be disease, disability, and social problems, and often there can be early death. And you can see over here to the right, just that arrow, this is conception to death. These are things that can happen to a child's life that's not intersected with some caring adults. And these aren't necessarily research-based, but I know that there is more conversation going on. There's many people that often ask, should there be more things added to the ACE test? And I know this is the conversation around some of these, is adoption, bullying, busy, distracted parents. That's actually something that you think about. When the original test of the ACE was in 1992 to 98, there weren't cell phones in the way that we have them now. And so this has become a really new problem. I actually talked with a foster parent the other day, and they were just telling me some of the story of the child that they have. And basically the reason that they have their child is because the mom was unable to stay off of her phone, and she didn't meet the needs of her child because she was so addicted to her phone. Or foster care, or maybe even frequent moves. Or this might be even something that you could think about or add in. What would be something that I would think might be added to that list? So, go ahead.
What about being moved from one nation to another as a refugee?
Sure.
We need to process that sometime.
Yes.
Because a lot of these people have that experience. That can be tremendously traumatic.
Sure. Neuroplasticity. It's a big word. You should learn how to spell that, and if you're in school, you could get really good points for it. Neuroplasticity is actually research, some of the research done by Dr. Caroline Leaf. If you just wanted to write her name down, you can see some of her videos and talk about some of her philosophy on that. But neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to reorganize itself, both in structure and how it functions. Now, of course, for me, as a Christian, and I think about God as the creator, I like to think about this as a piece of God, of how he wired us. And our brain is having the ability to reorganize itself, both in structure and how it functions. So this is some things that neuroplasticity can result from. And you'll see in this, there's some good and some bad. It's not all bad. Traumatic events, stress, social interaction, meditation. For Christians, we think about meditating on Christ. Emotions, learning, paying attention, diet, exercise, or new experiences. So even just let's think on a simple base here. Diet and exercise. They say that it takes 30 days to establish a habit. And so that's really, if you think about, that's neuroplasticity in your brain, that it's able to change its structure and how it functions. I'm going to go to the refrigerator and I'm not going to eat the ice cream. Instead, I'm going to get out a peach, because I've trained my brain over and over again that that's what I'm going to eat for 30 days, and hopefully that's changing how I am. It's my brain beginning to think differently, just because that's how God made us. We're reorganizing. So here's some of the bright and the dark side of neuroplasticity. So here's the bright side. Neuroplasticity makes your brain resilient. Neuroplasticity enables you to recover. So this is why it helps you to recover from a stroke or an injury or a birth abnormality. Isn't that a wonderful thing? You can learn new ways of being and responding to conflict. And in many cases, this is what helps us to overcome depression, addiction, obsessive compulsive patterns, ADHD, and other issues. I like to think that this is probably also, if you would take some verses from Scripture, just when we ask to have the mind of Christ, or that we ask God to take captive our thoughts and make them obedient to Him. That's part of that neuroplasticity where we invite God into our thinking. But some of the dark sides of neuroplasticity, so this would be what affects these children who have ACEs. Neuroplasticity means the brain is always learning. But think about this for a second. The brain is neutral. It doesn't really know the difference between good and bad. Some people might argue that. It learns whatever is repeated, both helpful and unhelpful, thoughts, actions, and habits. So think about that for a second, like a little child. Oftentimes when they're learning in development, they might see somebody do something. They don't know that it's good or bad, but they repeat that behavior. They do it. It's the adult who has to help tell them, no, honey, that's not a good thing to do. You should be doing this instead. Therefore, neuroplasticity may entrench depressive, anxious, obsessive, and overreactive patterns. In other words, if the brain isn't able to be resilient, that oftentimes instead it can be harmful to itself. Do you usually stop at 10 till or at 8? Do you stop at 10 till or at 8?
Whenever you want to, around 8.
Okay. All right. I think we're good. So one of the things that the way that God made us is that He wanted to get our brains to be the point when they're healthy, that they have self-regulation, that the way that our thinking works and how to respond is self-regulating brains mean that we're able to focus, we can manage emotions, we're able to adjust to change, we're able to hope, and we're able to manage future trauma. That's what a normal self-regulating brain does, that they're able to do those things. So these are some pictures of like what, once again, Shelley really likes animals and she thinks it's a good way to help us see it. But this is what a self-regulating brain would look like. Being able to rest well. Boy, I'd like to rest like that. Being able to be in relationships with people and to enjoy them, to feel joyful about that. A regulated brain, a self-regulating brain would do that. And this one, I like it. Just they're able to be. You can see that dog. He's a dog I want to go pick up. He's somebody that wants to be home, but he looks like he wants to be relational. That's what a self-regulated brain would do. So the definition of hope. Hope is a feeling of expectation and desire for a certain thing to happen. Hope is a feeling of trust. A desire for a certain thing to happen, a feeling of trust. When I read this definition, and I think about children who've had adverse childhood experiences, I feel like when I read this, that this is Jesus. Isn't this really what we hope that they will find in their life? Is that Jesus can give them an expectation and desire for a certain thing to happen, that they can be healed. I feel like hope oftentimes from our world is so me-centered, that it's not Christ-centered. I'm specifically thinking of a gal that I used to work with who had been sexually abused by her father. And she would come to counseling with our pastor and would be doing really great. And, he was really working on this model with her of moving towards Christ and how we find our healing in the resurrected Christ. But every once in a while, she would go back to her former therapist who was not God-centered. And it was almost like every time she would do that and come back, that we would have to undo. There was so much self going on in her. I have to protect myself. I have to push people away. I'm the only one who can heal. No one else can help me heal. No one can speak into my life. So let's hit this with another word. Hope and resilience. Children, teens, and adults who have a history of adverse childhood experiences, now catch this part, need a relationship with a minimum of one caring adult who is willing to offer hope and journey with them on a pathway towards resilience. They need a relationship with a minimum of one caring adult. Resilience, the definition of resilience, is the ability to bounce back from personal adverse conditions and or community problems or loss. Resilience is the power that moderates the effects of serious life challenges and provides hope and healing. Resilience is the quality that allows people to be knocked down by life and comes back even stronger. So I ordered a book. I'm beginning to read it. The name of the book is called Grit, G-R-I-T. If you're a John Wayne fan, that might be a good word that you remember. But the book is by Angela Duckworth. And actually, Angela Duckworth was a former 7th grade teacher, and she taught math. And she talked about how she was in a school that had different social economic classes. It wasn't just one class. People of diversity, different ethnic backgrounds. And she said that she was always surprised at how who would succeed in her math class and who didn't, who was able to get it and who wasn't able to get it. But what she realized, she would often get frustrated with that, but what she actually came to find out in the end is that the students who succeeded in the most in her class were the ones who had experienced failure on a test or failure to understand something, and they had made themselves be resilient and to bounce back. And so she actually quit her job doing that, and she did research, and that's what a lot of her research is about is, now isn't this interesting? What makes us resilient oftentimes is being able to bounce back from the challenges that have happened in our life. That's what makes us stronger for the next time. How adults affect children resilience. Changing the life trajectories of youth from an at-risk to resilience begins with changing the beliefs and behaviors of the entourage of significant adults. Can you hear that with me? It's not about changing the individual or the child. Changing the life trajectories of youth from at-risk to resilience begins with changing the beliefs and the behaviors of the entourage of significant adults surrounding the lives of children and adolescents. Second part, unconditional love is the bedrock of resilience because it creates security. Unconditional love. Who does that sound like to you? When I think about what is really going to make a difference in these children's lives is unconditional love from caring adults. It's adults being selfless and Christ-like and loving even when it's really, really hard to love and even when it's really messy and we want to give up and we're worn out. But that is the bedrock of what gives them security. And then I think I'll end with this slide and then we can break. The power of relationship, that one caring adult. Relationships shape our neural system of brain response. This becomes the template that molds all future responses. So negative relationships often equal chaos, but positive relationships equal love. I think I mentioned this to you before in one of our other teachings, but we find that over and over again with children and youth and young adults, it's having a relationship with a caring adult, oftentimes multiple caring adults, that what actually translates into their life of positive relationships that gets them to the other side. That's a big part of what our response is as a church to this adverse childhood experiences. So after the break, I'm going to talk a little bit about just what are some things that we can do as the church and talk about maybe casting some hope. Where do we begin? I don't want this to be all Debbie Downer, but I would love for you to be thinking over the break, maybe some questions that you have or some things that you would like to talk about or maybe some ideas that your churches have begun to do to be a part of it.
I would like for those of you who have been traumatized by having been moved from one nation to another as refugees. How have you dealt with that trauma? How do you help other people in your churches that have gone through the terrible experience of being displaced and becoming refugees? I think we need to share some of that in our time of discussion, because some of you have known trauma beyond anything that I have ever known. And you have learned ways to cope with it and deal with it. And I want us to be able to share that. So I'm looking at you who are refugees who are living in the United States now. And we have a lot of refugees who are viewing what we're doing, what we're talking about tonight, viewing it on the video recording, and they're seeing the PDF or the PowerPoint. So I think we can be helpful to one another. So be thinking about that. And Brockie, is that okay if we spend a little time on that? Good. Great. All right. Well, we'll see you after the break in about 10 minutes. Thank you. Is there anybody that needs help in terms of hearing or seeing? Jerry Louthan, did you ever finally get connected? Jerry Louthan, are you connected with us okay? Hello, Jerry? Jerry, did you ever get connected? Yeah. Have you been able to hear us, Jerry? Oh, good. Okay. Oh, good. I'm glad you're hearing us. Is that you? Is that Richard McKay?
Yes, it is, Dave.
Oh, okay. I didn't even know you were connected, Richard.
Yeah, I just got connected.
Oh, okay. I thought that was you, Richard.
Yeah, I was out mowing the yard.
Yeah.
Out mowing. Forgot about the meeting.
I'm sorry about all the problems you're having with your foot.
Yeah, another 6 weeks of sitting around doing not much of anything.
Yeah, after all, you've had how many surgeries on that now?
Well, this will be the second one on the same foot.
Yeah.
2 cataract surgeries. And that's about it. 4 of them since the first of the year.
Boy, I tell you, that's enough. Well, I think it's, yeah. Okay, mute your mic and we'll get started again, Richard, and I'm glad you're connected. So, our break time is up. We've had strawberries here, and I'm taking a couple of them home and putting them on ice cream later on, because the ice cream would melt here, like it's 100 degrees or almost outside. So, hope you all had a good break, and now Brockie's back to finish out the home stretch.
I think sometimes when we hear research or we hear a lot of things like this, that especially we think of them maybe as secular, but I also think that, there's a place for science in our faith too. And there's reasons why research is done or reports are done or all that. It really does help our learning. But I do want to say this really clearly, that I believe that even God can transcend research and that God can transcend stereotypes or what sometimes the world says to us, this is how it's going to be. I was just recently had a conversation with a mom. Her son came and did some teaching, and he's so bright, and he got his master's degree. He's in his 30s, I think. And she said, did you know that when he was a baby, that we had a lot of problems with him? And the doctors told us things like he'll never be able to function. Let's just let nature take its course, and that's what will happen. And at 3 months old, he was sitting up, and the doctor still said, no, he's still not going to be able to function. He was walking at 9 months. And lo and behold, who he is today has definitely transcended the reports that the doctors gave. And so I want to say that, but I believe that as Christians, we always have to believe that God can transcend anything that has happened. I believe that very strongly with all my heart. And so I just want to give you some verses. I just want to share with you just some verses that I was thinking about that I think go along with this. And so the first one, we're going to come back to that slide. Just remember again that Greek word, or the word for trauma, is actually the Greek word for wound. And so I've highlighted some words in these, and if you don't have color copies, I'll try to point those out. But this is from 1 Peter 2:24. It says, He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. And I don't know, I've been thinking about just by Jesus' own trauma that he experienced, that we have been healed. Another one is from Luke 10:34. And this is the story of the Good Samaritan. It says, the Good Samaritan went to the man and bandaged his wounds. And I was thinking about that. We don't know what all had happened to the man beside the road, but we don't know what his physical, emotional, spiritual, or mental health was. But it says that he bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And the next one is Hebrews 4:12, and I love this verse. I feel like this is definitely a verse that helps us understand what it means for God to transcend things that have happened to us in our life. And just to give you a little bit of background before we hit Hebrews 4, this passage is just, we spent some time reading about Sabbath rest, like rest that can only come from God. That there's nothing else that compares to that. We can't find rest anywhere else except for this type of Sabbath rest that comes from God. So this is Hebrews 4:12. It says, For the word of God is alive and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. Some translations say scalpel. It penetrates even to dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow. When I think of that part, I think about when you're in a doctor's office and you see like the skeleton with all the muscles on it. It judges the thoughts and the attitudes of the heart. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. I think that's so important, especially for the person who's been victimized. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give an account. I guess I feel like if I don't believe this verse is true, that God can be so active and alive that he's sharper than any scalpel, then I'm not sure why I'm in this business. If I don't believe that God can really transform these lives of children who've had traumatic childhood experiences, then I probably shouldn't be what I'm doing, but I believe that he can. I believe that's the kind of God that we serve. Ephesians 3:20 and 21. Just now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine, according to his power that has worked within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. And if anything that I could invite you into as a person who's a Christ follower, I think that we need to really, really, really be praying. Be praying for these children who've had these types of experiences. And maybe even just to say to you that as you're going through this tonight, it might be difficult because you might see yourself and where you're scoring at on the ACE test. And I guess I just want to offer to you some hope that God can do immeasurably more than we could ever ask or imagine. The piece of this verse that strikes me the most is it says, according to his power that has worked within us, to him be glory in the church. And this goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. I think that the church needs to be the first responders to people who are experiencing deep brokenness. That is how God's glory is revealed, is in the church. I often say that God picked the church to be his megaphone to the world. I don't know why he did, but that's what he chose. And that's where his glory can be seen when we are following him. And then just this passage, maybe familiar to many of you, the Isaiah 53. If you have a color edition, you'll notice that there's several verses that would really apply to trauma. There's words like suffering, pain, despised, transgressions, iniquities, wounds, iniquity. Those are things that we read. It says, Jesus, this is a prophecy, Isaiah 53 about Jesus. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. He was a man acquainted with personal trauma. He was like one from whom people hid their faces. He was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. I'll go on to the next part of that. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds, there's that word again, we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. I was reminded of a song just this past week as I was spending some time looking over my notes. And some of you might be familiar with this. It's a country song. It's by John Michael Montgomery. It's called The Little Girl. And I think it's probably one of the biggest questions that I have young adults ask me about their trauma is, where was God when that trauma was going on? That's a really hard question to ask. And sometimes, as my husband would say, that's above my pay grade. But I want to read some lyrics to you of this. It says the song is The Little Girl. Her parents never took the young girl to church. They never spoke of Jesus' name or never read of his word. Two non-believers walking lost in this world took their baby with them, and she was a sad little girl. Her daddy drank all day, and mommy did drugs, never wanted to play or give kisses and hugs. She'd watch the TV and sit there on the couch while her mom fell asleep and her daddy went out. And the drinking and the fighting just got worse every night, and behind their couch she'd be hiding. Oh, what a sad little life. And like it always does, the bad just got worse, with every slap and every curse, until her daddy, in a drunken rage one night, used a gun on her mom and then took his life. And some people from the city took the girl far away to a new mom and new dad, kisses and hugs every day. Her first day of Sunday school, the teacher walked in, and a small little girl stared at a picture of him. That would be Jesus. She said, I know that man there on that cross. I don't know his name, but I know he got off the cross because he was there in my old house and held me, boy, I get emotional, close to his side. And I hid there behind our couch the night that my parents died. When students ask me, where was Jesus in the middle of my trauma, I think of this song, and that's my prayer for them, especially for kids who haven't been rescued out of these adverse childhood experiences. I pray that they would know that Jesus is with them. I can't always get them out of what they're in, but I can pray that they would know Christ in the middle of that situation. Just as I'm reading through this song, I look at how many aces this little girl would have in the things that she witnessed in her household. And I often tell young adults that I work with, too, when they ask me, where was God in the middle of this? I point back to Isaiah 53 and say, he was already on the cross. He was already on the cross for the iniquities that were done to you. He was already on the cross. He took up your pain, and he took up your suffering. He wasn't hiding, and he wasn't someplace else. He was already on the cross, paving that way for you. Just to kind of give you a couple of things, I want to tell you some things that churches are doing to respond to this. This is a First Pentecostal Church in Phoenix, Arizona, who actually has a trauma awareness plan. And their plan is that their congregation understands what the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study is. They want them to be informed. They also want them to understand neuroscience development. How did God wire our brains? But they also want to balance that to help them understand the theological perspective on what trauma-informed care means. And they are offering practical methods to build a resilient and compassionate community. And I have this slide that you may have seen, and some of you will be very familiar with this. I had an opportunity to visit Burundi twice in my life, and I actually had an opportunity to visit the Burundi Trauma Healing and Reconciliation Center. I'm not even sure it's in existence anymore. I don't know. But I want to read to you, this was their response to the trauma that they saw from the massive genocide in their country. It says, during the crisis, many people have experienced a lot of unusual, shocking, painful, and unimaginable events. They are still wounded, broken, and despairing. For many, restoring peace seems to be a dream that will never come true. They are suffering effects of post-traumatic stress disorders, which can cause many to nurture the spirit of vengeance and violence. On an everyday basis, a lot of people in Burundi need healing from the traumatic experiences they have encountered. Both children and adults say that they experience sleep disturbances, inability to concentrate, angry outbursts, or startled responses. And many have kept bad memories, not only about their neighbors, but also about themselves, especially when they think about what they should have done or wish they would have done in past situations. So faced with this sad situation, Burundi Yearly Meeting of Friends responded with the help of the Friends Peace Teams projects from the African Great Lakes Initiative. They proposed the Burundi Trauma Healing and Reconciliation Center. The center would help mobilize people to join together to contribute to the national healing of Burundi. It is only through a long and difficult healing process that Burundi will be able to ask forgiveness in order to allow conflicting communities to reinstate good, peaceful relationships. I just want to say that phrase again. A long and difficult healing process. Oftentimes, working with children who come out of adverse childhood experiences is a long and difficult process. Sometimes the church is not hardwired to do messy. We need to get better at learning how to be a part of the messy. And this is some of the center's objectives: to implement sites where families and individuals in need of trauma assistance can be treated. That's the reality, is if children are having adverse childhood experiences, we need to be figuring out how to come alongside their parents and help them in their own healing. Their objective was to facilitate and coordinate workshops on trauma healing all over the country. They trained lay people such as pastors, pastors' wives, teachers, youth workers, church elders, and members of civil society in trauma healing and reconciliation. They fostered solidarity among counselors of trauma cases and encouraged research in the skills for the Burundian context. I think that's really important, is you have to understand trauma in your own context, where you are at, where you live. What works in Howland, Kansas isn't going to be the same thing that works in Wichita, Kansas. What works here isn't the same thing as what works in Nebraska. You have to figure that out for your own context. Their objective was to build and strengthen the capacity for dealing with trauma by means of literature, meetings, and seminars. And then also to promote mechanisms of the healing process using such things as music, theater, dance, games, and sports. And also sensitize the public and international bodies to respond to issues of trauma in Burundi. Those are some great things that Burundi did that we could actually implement into our own world today. The last slide that I just want to show you is kind of a funny thing, but not really. So since I've been on this journey of trying to understand trauma, I've been collecting books. So this is my reading list for this summer. And so I'm not necessarily recommending these books to you, but I just thought that would give you, if you want to find some more things to read, these are all recommended to me by some great Christian leaders. And so I wanted to give those to you, that you can look at those and find them on the internet. The Skilled Helper is just something to, we're given that, I got that as a gift to help me as a person, as a chaplain at the college, to hone in on my skills. The Anatomy of the Soul was actually recommended to me by Dr. Royce Frazier. Healing the Wounds of Sexual Abuse, And this one actually has a subtitle that goes with Scripture, Healing the Wounds of Sexual Abuse in the Context of Scripture. The boy who was raised by a dog, I have a friend who's an educator. She teaches in an area that has many children who come with high ACE test scores. The emotionally healthy leader is actually an individual, the young man. He's an adult now, and so he talks about the scars from his life, and he's actually a pastor of how God helped heal him as an adult. Trauma stewardship, you will often find that when you're in the mess, it's incredibly overwhelming, and it's exhausting, and it's tiring. And so we have to figure out how to steward who we are in the middle of that. The Body Keeps Score is a lot about how our neuro brain works and responds. And that last one is the book that I already referenced for you, Grit, by Angela Duckworth, which was really the research that set in the idea of what it means to be resilient, to be able to bounce back up. I would just say this too, just kind of in closing this part out. I can't say enough about how much I think prayer has to cover this. And really working with people on a daily basis who are struggling in this, we need to have good prayer cover and good conversations, divine communication with God over our steps and how to be present. But also, what I want to say too is we need stories in our church of healing. We need to not be afraid to let people who have been through these things and God has brought them healing for them to share. Because we need to understand from their stories how we can help be a part of that healing, how God might use us to be one of those caring adults in their lives to help them. And so I hope tonight that you'll just see that I just want us to be informed. I want us to learn to be better responders. And I do want to give you, Shelley said you could have her email address if you would like it. And it's Shelley, it's CHELLE @ pld.com. I'll just read that again. Yeah, I'll type that in on the chat. I'll send that to you. If anybody's interested in longer conversations with her, you can do that. And this is just scratching the surface of what's out there. And so I hope that this is something that will be helpful to you in your journey.
Should get the chat right there.
Right. Can we do that?
You
Sure.
want to type it in?
Yeah. Right there.
Uh-huh. They should be able to see that. Is it type?
To everyone.
Yes. So, Drew, can you see that? She typed the address into the chat box. Somebody,
Yep, I've got it right here.
You can see it?
Yes.
Good. Very good. Very good. Do you want to entertain some questions?
Yeah, I would love, if anybody has any questions or thoughts, and please remember I'm not the expert like Shelley is, but I would love to just hear anything that you are wondering about or thinking about.
Hey, Brockie, it's Drew. I would just say that as a person who grew up with a low ACE, I was just blessed to have great parents. And one of the things that I'm grateful for is my wife, who has probably a higher score. I don't know. I've not heard of that term before tonight, but just looking through it and knowing her life, I would imagine hers is fairly high. And something that she's tried to tell me over and over again is just about, it was a comment you made maybe in the first half, where you talked about how, maybe it might be easy for some of us with lower scores to get over certain things or to forgive people, or for little things maybe not to trip us up. And I just have a hard time understanding why other people sometimes have such a hard time with something that's a lot easier for me. And she's always telling me, yeah, just because it's easy for you doesn't mean it's easy for everyone else. And that I have gotten better about that as I've gotten older. But I do feel like a lot of people in the church still don't understand that and just have such high expectations and are just tough on people that have suffered through trauma. And maybe that's why we have a hard time connecting with our society as a church these days.
And Drew, I would even add to that in the church, I think we would like to think that these things happen, like you, that we want to say the majority of us I have a low A score or a 0. But I actually believe that there's a lot more under that we as a church, we haven't dealt with. And I do think that that we have to figure out how to move towards that. I don't know how else to say that. It's very difficult. And, I think we've kind of lived this life. I can remember my grandma wouldn't even use the word pregnant, because she thought that word was so messy, I guess. And I just think about the life that I live now and the things that I hear, but they're not just from people outside their church, they're inside the church, but it's because of the things that happened to them that weren't their choice. They were part of their story, but we don't know how to talk about all that. It's pretty difficult to do that. I think if I could say anything, it's sort of been funny to me in a college environment. Students just tell you anything. They really do. And, as an adult, when you've kind of worked on that candy-coated shell, it's a little shocking how they'll tell you stuff right off the bat. But there's also, for me, a wonderful thing that they trust me enough to let me listen to that, And I guess that's what I think we need to cultivate, that type of environment of not always having our shocked faces on, doing that. Like just learning to go, okay, let's start asking how we can let God intersect these places in your life and heal. So I'm with you, though. I grew up in I have one. It's really hard to relate sometimes. So, like the phrase, suck it up, buttercup, doesn't really work. So.
I would like to know if anyone else is aware of this Burundi Trauma Healing and Reconciliation Center. Desiree or Ernest or Diudine, are you familiar with that organization? Yes. Are you? Who is speaking?
Diudine.
Diudine. So, are you familiar with the Burundi Trauma Healing and Reconciliation Center?
Yes, I do, because one of the leaders is David Nyonzi. You might know him. And this program is known in Burundi, Rwanda, and the Congo. They have the same program.
Tell me, Diudine, how do you help refugees who go through the trauma of being displaced from their country? How do you help them? Because you're ministering to these people right now. How are you helping? How are you able to help them?
We talk very often about the power of forgiveness.
Yes.
And then we remind each other that if we don't forgive others, it is hard almost impossible for us to be forgiven also. And then, by that way, we try to teach those who are not those who are not believers in Christ. We show them that to forgive others can create a good relationship with those previously called enemies, and then we can build our future. For those who are Christian, it's easy because Jesus gave us an example that we should forgive those who did something wrong to us. And then to show that in the prayer that Jesus told us to pray every day, said that we have to forgive others because we also need to be forgiven of what we did. It's kind of hard because sometimes you can be in a group of the people who did something wrong to you. Whenever you see them, you are kind of affected. But because of the word of God, people try to overcome the situation. That happened in Burundi, Congo, and also because many people were settled in this country with the same problem. Even here, it can happen. Only my question is this: the Friends community have people in Africa and other countries to resolve this problem of trauma. Why did they forget people who were settled in this country? Thank you.
Thank you. That is so helpful. Forgiveness is one of the most important ways to help a person work through the trauma. Because as long as you hold the grudge and don't forgive, you can't find healing from the wounds, can you? That's the heart of the Christian message. That's Christ on the cross. Beautiful. Desiree or Kumar or Ernest, do you want to add anything? Because all of you are working with displaced, traumatized refugees. Anyone else? Any one of you? Ernest, do you? Or Desiree or Kumar?
Look something.
Ernest.
Yeah. I say about that is trauma. Is first is again to forget everything what happened. That is another way for forgiving. If we remember any time we were not Christian. You understand me, teacher? Hello?
Hello?
Do you understand me?
Yes. What you have said is very helpful. Is there anything more you want to say? Do you have anything more you want to add to that? Kumar, you're working with many Sudanese refugees. Do you find that it's difficult to work with all the traumatic experiences they've been through? Get that chat thing off there so I can see. Kumar, can you hear me? Desiree, do you have anything more to add to that? If you do unmute your mics, you need to. Desiree, I'm sorry, but we did not, your voice was obscured. I think part of the problem is, I don't know what the problem is, but we're not able to make out what you're saying. Somehow or other, your voice is obscured technologically. We're not hearing you. It's very muffled.
I don't know why.
Now try it.
Yeah, I said I don't. They already.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Kumar, if you have something to say, would you unmute your mic? Are there others of you who have dealt with persons who have been traumatized or victimized and are trying to work through the difficulties of that? And it can be something like a person who's been in an automobile accident or who's been in the military. It could be any number of situations. Bruce Carpenter, do you have anything more to share?
Dave, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
You know, I was just observing some things here. Just generally, we've all experienced of trying to work with people who have experienced some of these things. And I was just thinking about a couple people that I've tried to encourage. And I remember one young man who has gone through severe medical problems. And when I talked with him a while back, one of the questions he asked me was, why did God let me go through this? And when is he going to stop this stuff? But, you know, the other observation I have, I guess, is that these concepts are so important for us to learn and to work with. One of the reasons that we need to learn these concepts and these scriptures that Brockie gave us is that the world out there, the enemy of our souls, he is doing everything he can to make these lives more difficult, more traumatic. And so we're in a place that we can encourage, we can pray for people. The world in some situations is just beyond what we can imagine. The influence that some of the people are having on our children and on our young people. So yeah, I'm just observing the need for more prayer, more study, more encouragement from all of these things that we're learning. So thank you.
Bruce, I'm thinking that 35 years ago, there was a woman in our church whose son committed suicide. And she asked me the question that you just asked, that someone asked you, why would God allow this? And my answer to her was, I don't know, but I know that God is saddened just like you are and that God cares. I did not at all remember that I had said that to her until just a few weeks ago. I received a copy of a book that she finally wrote, and she included that particular experience with me in the book and said that was the one thing that really helped her through the trauma of her son's suicide. And so that was just an absolute shock to me that I would get this message 35 years later in a book. And it's because I didn't know the answer, but I knew that God cared, and I told her that because God cared, God was saddened just like she was. And that's as far as I'm able to go.
Yeah.
And that Christ shares in my suffering. Thank you for that. That's really helpful. I want to see who else is here. I can't get the whole line on the Bartlett computer. Richard McKay, do you have anything to add to this? Or Galen Burnett? Oh, hey, what about it, Dennis McDowell? You've seen a lot of trauma in your years.
Yeah, I'll just kind of reiterate the fact of the scoring has kind of been speaking to me tonight, and I think that the further our culture drifts away from God, the higher those average scores are going to be.
Yep.
And, you just, I don't know, really spoke to me. And I just kind of appreciate it. I might have been about a 3, maybe a 3.5 or a 4, depending on how we would look at things. But, yeah, thanks, Brockie.
We have all experienced trauma. And because of that, we can identify with others. It may not be the same kind, it may not be the same intensity, but we can at least identify with them. And when we can and do identify with them, we show them that we care. And that Brockie was helping us see that just that compassion toward them, that caring toward them, like the dog that was so content. That can be a healing factor also in their being able to work through the trauma. Galen Burnett, do you have anything to add to this?
Dave, this is Rick.
Richard McKay.
Yeah. I just experienced something just this last weekend discussing a certain issue with a young man and telling him that I've been praying for him and acknowledging that I recognize some of the issues he's dealt with from a personal point of view. He said, when I mentioned that I was praying for him and trying to help him out, he wanted more to do with the conversation, and he hung up on me. But my point here is that some who want help, and when I said God can help you, because God left me many years ago, and he don't want to do it. And it was hard to listen to that and try to figure out, okay, now where do I go from here with this kind of an idea, and how do I help this person? And of course, the biggest answer is how to pray for you.
I think too, Richard, like just it's so hard. In those moments for me, I want to take it personally. And I'm like, but I know it's not. It's their own stuff going on, and I feel like it's that getting back up again, extending another hand. I mean, it sort of feels pride swallowing for us. But yeah, I know that I really do believe it speaks to them. And just, I pray a lot for God to give me wisdom, like when do I speak and when do I be quiet? Or listening to them and them saying something, and like, how do I ask a question that keeps them talking? You know what I mean? Like if I can keep them talking about what's going on and quit like not having it divert to me, and a lot of times they'll begin to process, in such a way. But keep praying. I know God will give you wisdom. I really believe that.
Thank you for sharing. Anything more that you want to share? We're just about out of time, but this is an area that has affected all of us, and we all have to minister among the people who, in every one of our congregations, we encounter people who have been traumatized. Well, I think this is a time to say, Brockie, we thank you. You have helped us. This session has been particularly helpful. The other two have been also very helpful in terms of being able to get the resources and learn how to relate to all ages, but particularly youth, to enable us to discern what direction we're supposed to go in our ministry with persons and with younger people. All of this has been extremely helpful. And so we're grateful to Brockie for doing this. Now, next month, let's see, August the 5th is when we'll meet, and Jesse Penna will start a new course on developing leaders. All of us in the church need to develop the leadership in the church. And he has done a lot of work in developing young leaders to take charge in the church. So this is an area that's going to be extremely important to us. It's August the 5th, Jesse Penna, one of the professors at Berkeley College. So let's give thanks tonight. Loving God, we thank you for this Institute class, for each of our classes. For this Institute is a treasured gift to us. As we benefited tonight from your teaching through Brockie, we'll give thanks by sharing what we've learned for advancing your work on earth, for fulfilling your call in our lives, for helping people who've been victims of trauma and other disastrous situations. Give safety to all who will travel home tonight. Provide protection for every one of us, especially in those parts of the world where Christians are persecuted for proclaiming the gospel. Our desire is to be wholly faithful to you as we follow Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord, in whose name we give thanks. Amen. Well, we love you, friends, and we continue to pray for you each day, and we will look forward to seeing all of you on the 5th of August. Good night now, and thank you again.